What's up, theology nerds? This is Trip. Today on the Homebrewed Christianity podcast, we're going to talk about God. Who's surprised? Nathan, are you surprised?
I am not surprised at all.
Hi, Nathan. Nathan is the Homebrewed Christianity community coordinator. That means he does lots of junk on the internet. Like, talk to all the Homebrewed Christianity community people on the Facebook site and make sure you get all your audio and your videos and answers questions and tweets, but most importantly, you're a student at the Hatchery.
This is true.
And you've listened to the podcast before,
Once or twice, yeah.
I know. It's like, I mean, which is more than Alicia. Anyway, we're going to talk about God because we're setting up for a whole host of God-alicious podcasts. They are God calls. We're going to actually have 8 like live video streaming calls about God coming up. You can sign up for it, participate, ask questions and junk, or they'll come out on the podcast. You can listen to them. And it's going to include Roger Olson, John Cobb, Walter Brueggemann, Andrew Sung Park, Catherine Keller, Keith Ward, Amos Young, Schubert Ogden. So just go ahead and prepare yourself. But today, we're actually going to go through a whole host of different famous theologians and their answer to the question, who is God, and then make commentary. And then y'all are going to tell us if this format of the podcast is even entertaining. I promise it will be entertaining to me. We'll see what Manny, the editor, thinks about it when he gets it. What do you think, Nathan?
He's going to have a good time with this one.
And let me tell you how to run you make commentary about famous established theologians podcast. First off is you have an Imperial Irish Stout from Stone, and then you open Southern Charmed, the double bastard ale aged in bourbon barrels. And then
because one bastard isn't enough. You need 2.
No, you have to have 2 bastards. There's 2 of us, and we're going to be talking to lots of famous people telling us about God, and then we're going to know about God. Then we're going to have the God calls, and so I'm going to set up for the first theology conference at the Hatchery in Los Angeles, Redondo Beach, California, Transforming Theology. Boom. March 3rd to 5th. Interactive theology workshop. That's right. So people should come to that. And if you type in the code HOMEBREWED when you sign up for it, you'll not only get 3 days of a theology conference emceed by me and Philip Clayton with Amos Young, Cynthia Rigsby, Adam Clark, and Keith Ward. Plus, there are tons of other special guests we just can't even tell you yet. But I was emailing with a couple of them today. It's going to be crazy. There's going to be a coloring book for an interactive create your theology coloring book. And adult coloring books are trendy, Nathan.
They are. My wife loves them.
Well, you just wait till she gets a hold of this one.
She might not like this one.
She's like, I was...
Where are the cats? There's no cats in this one.
No cats. But who doesn't love getting out your Crayolas and reflecting on theodicy? Have you thought... Theology After Auschwitz coloring book. I have not Jesse, who's helping make this coloring, I have not thought about that. All right, so anyway, the Unfolding Theology Conference, March 3rd to 5th. It's here in Southern California. It's going to be awesome sauce. It's going to be amazing. And then if you use Homebrew code, you get to come for 2 extra days. And then you say to yourself, what's going to happen those 2 extra days? Well, it's 2 days with Jack Caputo and Peter Rollins talking about radical theology. That's right. See, some people would pay for 2 days with them to talk about radical theology. We're like, no, Homebrewed listeners get it for free if you get your ticket and type in the Homebrew code. You're welcome. There are links. Go to homebrewedchristianity.com. Now we're going to talk about God. But first, Nathan, you got to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Nathan. As Trip mentioned, I'm a student on the Hatchery. I think you mentioned that. I was a student at the Hatchery.
I think that was on the time we started over, but you're a student at the Hatchery.
I'm a student at the Hatchery.
And which is a incubator for common cause communities.
You can't get chickens there. Don't.
What about fish or fowl?
No, you can't do that either.
Did I send you the phone message we had?
Somebody told me about it.
Okay, yeah, like someone called, like, I was wondering what kind of chickens you have at the Hatchery. Like, yeah, the prime place of raising small chickens is 2 blocks from the ocean in Redondo Beach. The property value is so low, it works real good. Like, Anyway, were you from Ohio?
I'm from Ohio. Yeah. Youngstown, Ohio.
I met you at Progressive Youth Ministry last year.
In Chicago. Yeah.
But you're going to go with me to Progressive Youth Ministry this year in Dallas.
Yes, I am.
And
looking forward to it.
What's your common cause community?
Oh man. Right on. Put me on the spot.
All right. Don't tell us.
I'm going to tell you.
Oh.
I want to create a community for persons with disabilities, specifically persons with intellectual disabilities, to be inclusive for those of all abilities. So not just for persons with disabilities, but families, caregivers, and the like. See, I'm not against it. One of the cool things that we're going to do in Dallas, Texas, is the day before Progressive Youth Ministry at the Theologian or Boot Camp pregame is with Jorg Rieger, and he's the first person on the video that answers the question, who is God? It's like you did this on purpose.
I didn't do it on purpose. You could call it the lure of God, providentially arranging Jorg Rieger, who is currently a professor of theology at Perkins School of Theology, Southern Methodist University, Dallas, Texas, which will be hosting the Theologian or Boot Camp in February prior to PYM 16. And then after the end of the school year, he's going to Vanderbilt University. So they'll be getting Jorg Rieger, who, if you're a podcast listener, is like, I love him. His book, Christ and Empire, is amazing. And the fact that we're going to spend the day talking about Jesus, which basically means me and him get to talk about Jesus and empire and theology. Awesome. Anyway, he's going to say something about who is God. And these are all from interviews I did like 6 years ago or 7 years ago. The fashion is clearly.
Oh, it's great.
I know. Well, given that both of us get our clothes from the same source.
This is true.
It is true. We have matching sweaters and shirts, 5-4 clothing.
Yeah, 5-4 Club.
You should just check that junk out after using my code. So I get some discounts. All right. Anyway, here's Jorg Rieger. Who is God, Jorg? Tell me.
That is the big question that we'd all like to know, I'm sure. All of us have limited perspectives on who is God. I think for Christians that there's really, this is the place where we have to make use of the sort of resources that we have. That means our traditions going back really into the Jewish religion, the Judeo-Christian traditions. And who God is in these traditions is oftentimes described through stories. So rather than having some big ideas and giving you a 2-sentence definition, I'd rather talk about these stories. I'd say, well, how has God manifested God's self? For Christians, the real interesting question is, what happened in Jesus Christ? Is that something that points not just to the kinds of things that we would think about, like faith or social justice, but does it point to some ultimate reality behind it? For me, that's what points to God. What that means, though, is that God is exactly the opposite what we think God is. Instead of top-down power, God is bottom-up power. In Jesus, you see God at work through sufferings, through the cross, through solidarity with simple people. That's what the divine looks like at work, and that is the question for, I think, for Christians, when we have to answer the question, who is God? That has a lot of challenges. That challenges our traditional assumptions. It challenges the ideas of theism, where God is omnipotent and omnipresent and all-powerful, and all-knowing, and impassible, immutable, and so on. It gives us a completely different perspective. That doesn't mean that we have all the answers, but I think we have a better approach to maybe finding some answers.
Boom! There's Jorg Rieger. What do you think about that, Nathan?
I like it. I like his answer.
Are you thinking to yourself, it'd be fun hanging out with him for a day?
I'm excited now.
I know.
I'm even more excited.
Well, look, Jorg Rieger, Christ and Empire is one of the best books ever. Like, you should all go read it. And clearly click through an Amazon link on Homebrewed Christianity. But what I thought was interesting about these is when we sat down, and these questions were all voted on by normal people. So there are 10 of them, and they're like 2 videos that we came up with for each one of different answers from these all like tenured systematic theology professors. Is how you frame a question as a theologian reveals as much as your answer. So when you ask the question, who is God? And what is his initial response? Like any good theologian, right? You say, who's God? And you're like, WTF. Like, right? Like you have to have this moment where you go, I don't know. Or are we really allowed to talk about that? Or mystery or negation or something like that, right? Like you have to say at some point, human language, which is something these creatures on a mediocre planet, in a mediocre solar system, billions of years in the cosmic journey, who eventually knew they were going to die and then reflected upon it and came up with words and language and ways of interacting and symbols to reflect upon the structure and meaning in their finite existence, eventually have a word God, and it may or may not correspond to something that is in relationship to us, and brought the whole system and organic evolutionary trajectory into being. Like when we use words, there's limits to it, right? Like who is God? And do we say who, what, where? But what I find interesting about Jorge's response is he begins by critiquing our natural desire to answer the question, who is God, by abstracting, where our answer is something everyone can affirm, right? And instead of going, well, who is God? Let me say something even more and more general. What is God? Or what's entailed in the concept of God? Or what's harbored in the name of God? Or something like that. He goes, well, we're Christians. Abstracting the answer to the God question doesn't actually get to where we're going, let's go to the narrative, the story. And let's go to the story of the people of Israel and the story of Jesus. And when we go there, we answer the question, who is God, by telling the Jesus story, who is the person embodying this mission vocation of Israel, which is this ongoing story of God with history. And it's about the opposite of what we think. Bottom up power. It's about God suffering with us. It's about solidarity with the underside. And that image or way of answering the question, who is God, challenges the definition of God you get when you abstract God. Normally, like if you begin like a good Aquinas, like medieval theologian, who is God? Before you ever add any Jesus-y, Jewish, Bible references, omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence, all these abstract, eternal, perfect ideas, then you Jesus-ize it. And you kind of fit Jesus in. They do it in really weird ways. How do you fit God changing in history? How do you fit prophets? How do you fit the pathos of God, the passion of God? All that. It has a hard time getting in. And what Jorge does, I think, really powerfully is goes, no, let's not abstract the question, who is God, to some abstract, generic human asking the question. I'm a Christian theologian. When I answer it this way. And I start talking with Jesus, which is obviously one particular Jew in a long history of a minority report, namely Judaism. And here's what it even looks like, and it's opposite of what you're expecting.
Yeah. I like that that move. I mean, it seems like such a simple thing for me, but it's not one that I can recall ever being presented with in my past is starting with Jesus and then moving to God instead of abstracting God and then fitting Jesus in. So I really like that.
Well, and part of it, I think, is like I did a thing once where I was teaching an intro to philosophy of religion class, and I asked the question the first day, not like as a trick question, but just to show that when we all use the word God, what we mean is something quite odd, quite different. Like everyone's version's different. And honestly, like the definition's not something they had on the last day of class. So I handed back the same paper and told them to answer the question again. Mm-hmm. Like no one had the same thing except like one fundamentalist who was like, who is God? What the Bible says God is. And you're like, oh my God. But why I say that is because I think that if you think about Christendom, think about the history of the church, think about the power of the church shaping the West. And if we said to ourselves, does the image of power that dominates the West show bottom up organization power, or does it show top down hierarchy? Does it show that a true leadership, service, all those types of things exist by sharing suffering with the underside? Does it, does like genuine divinity, is it revealed by having solidarity with the underside? Like, is that true? We'd say no. And so, like, while what he says seems really obvious if you just turn your Jesus vibe on, it's also really contradictory because I don't think we recognize how much the word God has not been Christianized. And later after this, Jorg wrote a book called Occupy Religion, where he points out that the concept of God's been occupied. And what we need is the understanding of God to actually be reshaped in light of God's self-testimony, revelation, the person of Jesus, the prophetic tradition, and such.
Amen.
Amen. Well, that's what I'm talking about. But all right, so
I don't know.
Laurel Schneider doesn't know. I'm hit play fast. So Laurel Schneider is a philosophical theologian. She has a really cool book on multiplicity. And I mean, we've watched these right before we were going to talk. And I'll just say, like, listen to this. Like, so when she spends more time on the limit move of like what we don't know, what we can't say and stuff. But pay attention to what she says after it. Because I was like, if you just cut off the first half, right? Like where she's dwelling on our inability to speak and heard the affirmations, they're powerful and beautiful. And so I'm interested in how both are true at the same time. What's that tension? And maybe that's the tension as Christians we need to be in, both like, let us limit, let us pause, let us think about, can we really say anything? But we have to say. And anyway, you'll hear it because Laurel Schneider's amazing. And, yeah, you should all go listen to our longer interview later about, polydoxy. It's on the podcast a couple years ago. Anyway.
God is a name. The name God is a metaphor. And I think of that name and that metaphor in the same way that Martin Buber tried to think about the I-thou relationship.
Martin Buber is a very famous Jewish theologian and philosopher of the 20th century, was a Union Theological Seminary the same time, like Abraham Heschel, who was there for the Jewish side, Paul Tillich, Reinhold Niebuhr, all that crowd. His book, I and Thou, famous. Anyway, that's Martin Buber, if you didn't know.
For me to say who God is would be as problematic as for me to say who any person is, as if I can fully encompass an understanding of the unique, incommensurate reality of that person by the name, by simply the name of the person. And if I can't do that with another human being, if I can't do that with another creature, then how can I do that with God? Having said that, I believe the right answer to that question is I don't know. There are things that I can say I know about God. I know God to be lover, and that creation itself is evidence of that love. I know God to be the basis of existence. I know God to be the purpose toward which life itself moves. But those are faith claims that come out of my tradition and out of my own spirituality, and I cannot place them in the category of knowledge and of being able to say, therefore, who God is. I can say what God does, but not who God is.
There you go. so her answer actually does a couple really like ninja moves, academic moves. And I'm interested in whether or not they got picked up at all, if you weren't aware of them or have read her books, which is always cheating, I guess. It's like, Nathan, without a PhD and not having read her books, did you notice? Yeah, but one of them is about the mystery of subjectivity. So who is God? Like if I was like, who is Nathan? If I got to answer you, who you are other than you, or explain your common cause, I may actually sell your common cause better than you. Because,
well, you definitely have a wider audience.
No, I just meant like, you know, right. Describing it or pitching it. Well, anyway, yeah. But like like we recognize when we're talking to a human that we have the idea of the person in our head, and that does not fully correspond to the person.
Isn't it also true that the person doesn't have an idea of who they are?
Yeah. Now, I would say that classically, and I'm not that you spent much time thinking about Aristotle's definition of God, but like God is thought thinking itself. And actually, like, that's important in the sense that, you know, today we'd use things like, oh, we have an unconscious and our memory is not perfect or whatever. But part of perfection in the classic definition of God is that God knows all, but actually with the perfection about God's knowing is knowing God's self completely and loving it. Not loving it like a football game, but loving it like part of maturity is you coming to know yourself and it being before you and still like choosing to live and savor existence. So like that. But like, I mean, this is actually true for like any good love relationship. Like the best way to be a partner is to make sure that your partner is always a subject and not an object. The moment they become an object, they're no longer alive. They're obviously still have a flesh suit, but you assess them like, are you performing the idea of me, the idea I have in my head of you? I'm disappointed in you. Why? Well, you're not being yourself. Who's yourself? Who have decided you should be? And so like part of even staying in love, having a genuine relationship with friends, family, partners, all that has to do with preserving their subjectivity, which means preserving their mystery. Like mystery is correlated to subjectivity at the beginning. And so, and that correlates like people, she brings up Buber to Levinas, things like that, where the other in their otherness insist, I'm not your object. It's a real similar move like where Jesus is like, you know, the Bible says don't bang your neighbor's wife, but you should probably not look at her lustfully. And that doesn't mean Jesus is wanting to like stalk your internet cookies. You know, like you could hear like, oh, but he's going, no, like become a person where when you see someone that's beautiful, you don't go, how can I objectify that person and make them an object that meets my desires? And so one of the brilliant things about Levinas or Buber, both Jewish philosophers, and the whole Jewish philosophical tradition about God is that God is wholly other, and is precisely in God's otherness, God remains the living and life-giving God. And I think that's where the connection is to her going, well, I can't say who God is, but I can say what God does. What does God do? God's lover. God is the one that gives the foundation of existence. God's the one that gives the teleology, the future, the call. And those are faith claims precisely because God is not the right answer to a knowledge thing. Like, who is Nathan? Well, I've checked his Facebook profile. You know, like, he's this object and let me explain. Like, the right answer to Nathan is getting to know Nathan and being his friend, and then you figure out who he is. The right answer to Tripp is doing that. Like, sometimes I joke about like the right answer to what a bunny is watching a bunny be a bunny, not killing it, cutting it in half and putting it under a microscope and diagramming it. Right? Like you can't find bunniness in a dead bunny under a microscope. Bunniness has to do with the hippity hop and the little carrots and being all like thumper and junk. And so what I found interesting about it is like, one, preserve the mystery of subjectivity. Two, who is God? I don't want to answer it by who God is, but what God does. And then when you say what God does, they're faith claims precisely by what is faith as opposed to knowledge. Why does she attend to that? And she talks about it in a book. The West has tended to see claims for truth as grabs for power. So if I answer who is God, and the answer for who is God's given by a king who gives a hierarchical image, the truth is undifferentiated from power. And so part of the subversive part of like, who is I am? I am is who, like, I will be who I will be. Namely, I will be what I do. Right? Like God's defined by God's relationship, actions, investment, and history, similar to what York is saying. And what she does is go like, yeah, faith is what identifies God that way, not like truth. God's not an answer to a syllogism. God is the other.
I'm glad that you explained that a little bit, because at first when I was hearing like the first part of her answer, I'm thinking it sounds so impersonal almost, so she's talking about the metaphor of the name, and that you can't know God. And I'm like, well, but we often talk about being in relationship with God, but how can that, there just seems to be a disconnect there in the way I was understanding it. So that was pretty helpful.
No. Well, now we're going to do Bill Dean because, well, you don't know who he is, but, he's has been one of the longtime liberal theological proponents. And he died a couple years ago. And
you've already answered the question by saying who is God. Who is a personal referent. I don't believe that whatever God is a who, if a who means a person. Again, you have the problem that humanism presents. Why should we decide that which is most profound, that which is most real, is based on the human form, or even the human mind? Why is God an anthropoid? It seems to me that whatever God is, God is not likely to be built on the model that was introduced only 3 million years ago to the biological world. That God, in some sense, may not be even a being. But as some people have said, God is being itself, or God is a force, or God is an energy that still fulfills the functions we typically ascribe to God without being a being. So I think of God as not abstract, but in some sense diffuse. God is a presence that's everywhere and is effective everywhere.
all right.
It's hard to wrap my mind around.
You were distracted by the phrase "the Force."
I was thinking about Star Wars. I was.
It does make you think. Why have I only seen it twice? If the Force is awakening, little did we know the Bill's like, you want to know what the Force is? It's thy diffuse energy that is God. So I'll go ahead and say this is one of the answers that I completely understand. Well, I wouldn't say completely in the arrogant sense, but like I understand it and it drives me nuts. So like, but part of it is like, this is also helpful. Like so many times, like the way you hear a question, what is the counterpoint and how does that shape it? So when he hears the question, who is God? His counterpoint is what? Humanism. Now, most Christian theologians don't think the counterpoint's humanism, right? Like, and he means, I think, secular humanism, not Christian humanism. But, where there's this anthropocentric of understanding of reality where you're prizing humans. Now, obviously, after the ecological crisis and our awareness of it, anthropocentrism is a bigger problem, and humanism may be problematic if you're creating a whole kind of value structure, ethical system off of prizing humanity in some sense apart from God or God's dream goal whatnot for the world. In light of the ecological crisis, that might be problematic. But one of the things I think ends up getting missed there, and he even says it, is it like, I don't want to call God a who because that means God's a person, and personal-ish existence didn't emerge till 3 million years ago. No, as an evolutionary panentheist, I would just say like, that means God spent billions of years investing in the cosmos to get to the point where there are subjects. I'm not talking about like subjectivity, mind, interactive, relationship, souls, whatever spirit or what you want to call the fact that we can cry at stringed instruments and other things can't. That, like when we copulate for genetic reproduction, it can mean something. All those things, like that took millions of years to get to. And I don't think that therefore means because in creation, the personal, individual subjectivity or community shared identity emerged later. That means God is unlike it. Like to me, that should mean that God is no less than personal. If we have these layers of emergence of growing complexity and interaction from quantum physics, solid state physics, chemistry, biology, social biology, poetry, symbols, signs, community, ethos, all that kind of stuff, then God has to at least be as complex as that, but clearly not that, right? So I think one part of what he's saying is like, you say who is God and you think God's a person, and by person we mean something just like us, and that makes us into some like idol writ large we call God. Yeah, that's a good thing to critique. Stupid. But then to not recognize that the fact there are billions of years no one ever asked the question, who is God? And the fact that we did is a result of this huge process of evolution, and that through the emergence of new layers of complexity, the question, who is God's emerged. To me, that evidence begs us to say God's no less than personal. Not God some mystery, some ground of being, some like force, energy that should not have anything like else said. No, that means God's no less than personal, because we've emerged to this point. And what is calling us into being, what is bringing forth the possibilities out of the world, should at least be as complex as us.
I like that. No, I mean it's hard to wrap my mind around, though.
No. I'm just glad I stopped. Otherwise, we'd have had 20 more minutes.
Well, so what do you think? He said, that God is not a being, but that God is being, like that. I've heard that before. I've heard it a lot of times. But like, what does that actually mean? I don't even really know.
Well, I think part of like that, I think that's a good question. So like when people differentiate beings from being, there's a bunch of different ways you make an ontological distinction between being with a capital B and beings. It's also similar to the infinite finite distinction. Being, capital B, infinite. They have no beginning, have no ending. They do not have a source for their existence. Beings, finite things, have beginnings and endings. They are derivative. They are not self-sustaining, and all that kind of thing. And I think all of that's true. Like to me, the question of who is God is a question that required God relating to the cosmos for a really, really long time to ever have anyone ask it. And as Christians, like if we think back to like Jorg's answer or Laurel Schneider's answer, like to get around to saying stuff like, oh, God is lover, or God is revealed in the story of Israel and Jesus, things like that, means that God was invested in a way more vulnerably, more risky, more open than we are to even like the people we love the most. I mean, not like parents going to raise their hands, but like I'm all down to outcompete other people for how much I love my kids and stuff. But like the vulnerability and things your loved ones bring up in you, like, it has beginnings and endings. Now the idea that God's investment in us is one that is poured out into the world without that, right? Like that God becomes fully vulnerable and invested in the world, namely to embrace it all, which is at the heart of the Christian story. Like to make that, like to take the personalism out of the gospel, I think takes out the fangs of the awesomeness, right? Like if the cross is impersonal, if the resurrection is impersonal, if your sins are forgiven, or get up your mat and walk, or you belong, all those type of things that run through the story of Jesus, the message of the kingdom of God and all that. If you take the personalism out of it, if God's just the force or energy or something behind it, then you don't have the craziness, which is at the heart of Protestantism. I mean, it's at the heart of the gospel in general, but of like that insight at the heart of Protestantism where like you as a human subject, like are known completely and loved completely. And that's the most true thing about you. Like to me, Paul Tillich talks about it, who also talks about the ground being, and he says like the gospel has to do with accepting the fact you're accepted. And that's connected to that ground of being idea, but it's also connected to like you are known completely and loved completely. And what's most true about you is that when you're known completely, you are loved, which rechanges our own relationship to ourselves and all kinds of things. So it might just be I'm a preacher. And so like if you downgrade some of the things that make perfect sense to me existentially, all that kind of stuff, I go, I don't know about that. Anything else?
No.
Well,
I mean,
first, before even listening to what Tony Jones said back in the day, I would like your feelings about this, 2007 styling.
Wow, so young. He looks so young.
He does.
Almost not even like the same person.
We'll put the links to the video, on the video that we're playing through and talking about.
The best part in this clip is when he takes off his glasses. There's a key point when he's talking and he takes it's really dramatic. It's really worth watching.
You won't get that unless you go to Homebrew. I'll put the videos up there underneath the podcast post. But anyway, here's Tony, and the way we have it paused, he's smirking. I'm tickling him right now with my pen on the video. You hear that, Tony? All right, here he is. Who's God, Tony?
God is... God, that question is a hard question to answer.
Pause. I've not heard him not answer a question in a long time. Anyway, that's all.
For me, it seems like God primarily is the creator of the cosmos, who, by dint of that creation, is in relationship with that creation and is somehow also envelops that creation. So God is somehow both other than all of creation, including me, but also deeply, not only in relationship, but almost encompassing. I already said that. I'm just repeating myself now, but it's hard. It's so hard for me to articulate. It would have been so much easier for me to articulate 20 years ago who is God, right when I was 20 years old. But now that I'm 40 years old, I think that God is...
He pulled off the glasses.
Both the divine being and creator of the universe with whom I have a relationship, but also this divine being who completely envelops and surrounds me. So in some ways, God is totally other than me, and in other ways, God is like, what would be the adverb? Theotically inhabiting me. Is that a word? Theotically?
It is now.
All right.
Theotically inhabiting me.
Was that your voice back there saying it is now?
Yep. If you're listening to this and near Twitter, I think that you should tweet at Jones Tony that you too have been theotically inhabited. Actually, my favorite part was when he took off the glasses, and for him just to point out that he's a human, unlike most theologians. We try to avoid becoming one. Where he said, like 20 years ago, answering the question, who is God, was easier. And to me, I think one of the things good questions do is they're revelatory in the sense that if you said the same thing you said 20 years ago or 2 years ago, it shows more that at some level you're protesting wrestling with the question and engaging the question and investing in it than taking it seriously. So a lot of people take their answer seriously, and then by taking your answer seriously, you avoid the question altogether. And so, like, knowing that there was a time you were more confident and it was 20 versus 40 is, I think, a really good, like, it's just a good thing to remember.
Yeah, definitely. He doesn't seem to have, I'm just coming off the heels of the last answer. He doesn't seem to have too much of a problem saying that God is a being.
No.
I just find that interesting, I guess.
Well, and I think, like, when he talks about, God's creator in relationship to us and then envelops us. God is this, that. All the times he makes the tensions, he's trying to say God is both immanent and transcendent. When we talk about God's immanence, it has to do with God's presence in the world. So that could mean in relationship to suffering, injustice, oppression. It could be in relationship to our own kind of wrestling with pain relationships, sharing in our joys, our triumphs, all that kind of thing. Like, that's about the immanence of God. And then it envelops us, but as other or as transcendent. It has to do with God's otherness, and that's a way of talking about the creator not being the creation. Like, what is the difference between God and the world? Previously you could talk about beings and being, or infinite and finite. The transcendent immanence is a similar thing when you talk about God. And one of Tony and I's arguments that began after that and still is running is whether or not process theology believes in the transcendence of God, which it does. That's a correct answer. Just letting you know, Nathan, for your theology papers.
You could. And so that way, if that question comes up, I know how to.
Yeah, especially don't footnote Tony Jones. But footnote, take the glasses off. Well, that you might get points for that. I don't know. But when it goes to the transcendence of God, that understanding that and how you understand it is really important. Some people transcendence of God then deflates our affirmation of God's immanence, sharing in suffering, all that kind of stuff. Like when you think back to what Jörg Rieger had said, the transcendence of God shouldn't be a way of saying this narrative, the story of Israel, of Jesus, is anything less than revelatory about God. But if you look through church history, there are those who thought the transcendence of God, the otherness of God, was so big that even like conversations the prophets have with Israel or the suffering of Jesus on the cross are things that the transcendent one is just unfit for. And I think what Tony's trying to do, and what he does in his much more mature work, Did God Kill Jesus? Is try to articulate both at the same time. To say that part of the beauty of the Christian understanding of God is to say that God is fully immanent, in the sense that God shares, participates, and is vested in everything that's in history, from the worst to the best. But God is also transcendent, in that God is other than the world. And in that otherness, it not only preserves the mystery subjectivity of God, but also preserves the hope of God eschatologically for the world. That the world has a future that isn't of its own making. I think that's the dynamism that's in it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard thing to sit with, that tension sometimes, all the times. But I think the thing that I'm hearing the most from all the differing answers is that the question is worth asking regardless of how you answer it and how that changes, when you're 20 or when you're 40 or whatever.
Well, I also think we could think of answers that are just horrible. But
I like this question.
but Victor Anderson from Vanderbilt Divinity School, he's about to give the what's the when you're playing that game, Yahtzee.
Yahtzee, yeah.
He's about to do the Yahtzee. Like, oh, these are good numbers. And then when you get like doubles, you're like, oh, now you're in a different category. Is that Yahtzee?
No.
Well, let's imagine a game where there's like, he's the golden snitch.
He opens at the close.
The thing you chase around in Harry Potter.
I know that was a ref. Never mind.
All right. I'm not a Harry Potter guru here. You can explain it to us later, but you're going back and forth in the game, but if you get the snitch, you just win.
That's the trump card, so to speak.
The trump card. Yes, trumps. He's unrelated to Donald, but not only does he not use hair product, Victor is like a world-class theologian. He's not a Presbyterian in the sense that Donald Trump is a Presbyterian.
Good. Good.
We should talk about Donald Trump later. But anyway, Victor Anderson, Vanderbilt Divinity School, he wrote one of the most amazing theological accounts of race. Everyone should read it. He also has done some amazing theological ethics work, and I like him. Every time I've interacted with him, I'm like, oh, dude, he's awesome. So anyway, Victor Anderson, here you go. Who's God? Because he likes the question, but he's about to golden snitch your Yahtzee Trump card.
Because it's not a question I would ask.
Oh.
The question I ask is not, who is God? The question I ask is, how is God meaningful as a concept, as an idea, in the interpretation of my life experience? God has meaning by virtue of the way the idea of God brings richness and depth and vitality and the springs of energy into a being whose daily life is constantly being drained by the routine of life. So when I evoke the name God, I'm invoking not a person who settles all the questions of my life. I'm invoking the being who gives meaning to my life. God, therefore, is the source and the joy of my life that gives vitality, meaning, and expression to the deep structure of what it means to live well in the world.
Boom shakalaka.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. That was the Yahtzee.
Yeah, I feel Yahtzeed.
The golden snitch just got captured. And here's why I like it. He's like, well, I thought when I was doing it, oh no, Harry, not whose God was God. You're just like, oh, here comes deflationary theological responses because you're a theologian and that means you don't know how to say much about God. No. He's like, oh, I think how. And what he does very quickly is point out, when we answer the question, who is God, what are we doing? We're talking about how we actually interpret our existence and understand its meaning and purpose and values. And what he's pointing us to is for us to own what it is we're actually doing when we talk about God. Some people talk about God and you can have the most flippant, unpersonal, ridiculous conversations where they talk about God, but you don't think God's the matter of the conversation, right? Like, when Donald Trump talks about God, when people talk about God and you think, are you talking about what you think you're talking about? Because if you're talking about God, you obviously wouldn't treat it this way. Martin Luther actually talks about this at the beginning of the larger catechism. But basically what he's saying is like part of like taking God's name in vain is talking about God without realizing what you're talking about. And what you're doing is you're talking about how you actually understand, interpret yourself, the world, what's going on, you're making meaning. And part of that is to recognize that the language of God functions. And what Victor's done in a lot of his work is show how the language of God functions to hold in all sorts of oppressive regimes, all sorts of perverse systems of power, all sorts of ideas of God that have been polluted and distorted by the worst parts of humanity. Other theologians, like feminist theologians, talk about even the way the language of God functions, and that if we only use masculine language about God, then you tend to think that God's a man, even though God's not a man at all. The language of God functions. So let's talk about how. It is a way of recognizing the power of God language, demanding us to take attention to it. And I think to realize that it's not the deflationary God talk and certainty in God talk are simultaneously problematic.
So who God is revealed in how God functions for us.
Yeah, because when we answer the question, who is God, your answer isn't about God as God is in God's self. Your answer is about God coming out of your narrative, your story. As a Christian, it comes out of the story of the people of Israel and all those things. There's a situation from the place at which you talk about God. So how you talk about God, most of what we see in worship was written by some dead Jews a long time ago in the book of Psalms, written in the Hebrew scriptures, written in the New Testament. Like how we talk is shaped by these stories, lives, experiences, expectations, continued presence of God in the community and stuff. So attending to that is different than going, well, who is God? And then you abstract your understanding of God from.
I like that. It seems to open the door to multiple interpretations. You know, I guess I'm curious as to what his response would be about, you know, some sort of ultimate, you know, objective, this is God kind of thing. Because it sounds like what you're saying is that it opens the door for multiple like, oh yeah, well your version of God is right and your version of God is right, you know.
Well, and I think part of it is like most people don't go, like sometimes right isn't the right response to it, maybe, but maybe putting it on a gradation or what are the results from how you talk about God? But I think the way it problematizes the question is helpful. I mean, it's not how I would naturally go to answer it, but then everything that it provokes me goes, well, that's good that was said. Anyway, we got one more, and it's Donna Bowman, who's writing the Homebrewed Christianity Guide to Being Human in the series. She also is on the Matrix DVD set. If you watch the documentary on the Matrix DVD set every Christmas, like someone else that's listening to this podcast, there's the commentary one where like Cornel West and Ken Wilber talk to it. And then there's like the documentary on like philosophy in the Matrix. And she does that. She has a real sweet picture of her riding Neo's motorcycle.
Nice.
Which is real important. But now she's going to talk about this.
God is our companion. God is the source of a wider, deeper connection with our fellow human beings, with the planet, and with the universe. Without God, I'm limited to what my senses can tell me. But God provides me with possibilities for my action that I couldn't see myself. And by being open to the call of God, I can be more effective in actually changing the world with my action.
All right. That was fast.
Yeah, quick one.
I know, like answering questions directly and quickly is not what theologians are known for. Yeah. So what stuck out?
I guess the she's talking about the limits of her senses, and God allows her to come into contact with things beyond what she's able to perceive with her senses. And I don't know. That's an interesting idea. I never really thought of it like that, I guess. And it just in some of the little work that I've done in disability theology, the potential there for those people who have differing intellectual capacities, their experience of the world and of the divine and their sensory experiences are so vastly different from maybe you or I. So it just opens up a whole different world of possibility.
Yeah, well, and I mean, underneath it, there are lots of parts of it that are so subtly processed. She actually wrote a really cool book on dialoguing Whitehead and Karl Barth's Doctrine of Providence. So if people are into that, check it. But part of that notion of God as companion, God as the source of possibilities in life. And then when she moves to the talk about God without God, there's these limits. Like the thing underneath that is this, for process people, this concept of prehension. And what is most true is our interconnectedness. Now, our senses, in one sense, sensationalism, the only access we have to the external world's been debunked scientifically a long time ago, even though we don't think that way. And we recognize how we're entangled in each other in all sorts of ways scientifically. But the coolest part about what I think she's saying is to go from God brings to us possibilities from this whole entangled, interpenetrating creative web that is existence. And we tend to ignore, mute, and silence so much of it and then depend on our access to it via our senses, from our situation, from our conditions, from our things. And when you think of it as like God is the one that opens up possibilities, connections, relationships that aren't immediate to us, and then connected to what you were saying around disability, then I think, thinking of I have hit my microphone. I have friends that are like legally blind or completely blind, and their relationship to their other senses is really different than mine. Right. But when you think that your senses could easily be one thing that when the volume's turned up, you miss all the others, it rearranges the way we evaluate humans and their connection to reality. If your connection to reality is already established, right? Like you are connected and your senses are one among all the other possible ways you could connect to it, and those volume knobs are always turned up, then the connection you have from the source that is the place in which all things are interacting, namely God or the spirit or whatever you want to talk about it, then you actually have the possibility that that there's connections that are more intense or intimate that we don't know about, namely because we always have all five knobs cranked up. It's like you discovered rock and roll and that didn't have a mid scoop in the distortion. You're like, you don't want to turn the mid all the way down, the highs and lows all the way up, and which is the distortion everyone thinks of for 80s music, if you're wondering. Like,
this is a whole new nerdy realm we're going into now.
No mid scoop. What do you think? Like, I only thought of it because of what you said, like, in the sense that, like, if you are connected and if God is giving you possibilities from that fully connected thing, because, I mean, you and I both have experience with contemplative practice. Like, sometimes it's precisely by spending all the time to turn off all those things that you would think is how you connect to reality, that then you connect to something that's like by taste way more real, and that by taste I mean something that's not sensationable.
This might be a dangerous move here, but this what you're talking about reminds me of something that I've heard Pete say a few times. Pete Rollins. I know. It's that, it's not that we're adding like a new experience. So like I've had 10 experiences of something and now I'm adding an 11th experience, but God is that which changes how I've experienced all of those other things. Mm-hmm. So it's not like we're adding a new sensory experience of God, but God is that which alters all of the sensory experiences. I don't know if that's a fair assessment of what you're saying.
No,
that reminded me of that.
I've heard Pete say that before.
I'm sure you have.
And that, I won't tell you an argument about him when he says it, because I'm always like, yeah, and Anselm said that, which I'm pretty sure y'all don't agree, because this next line has to do with God is that which nothing greater than can be conceived. But I actually, I find it helpful. The other part about what she said that I appreciate is the answer to who is God begins with the affirmation of God as like source, sustainer, and all that kind of stuff. But the whole description assumed I'm talking to you about the one I'm in relationship to. It was the first answer of the theologians whose answer, who is God, sounded like someone who's like, oh, well, I'm in relationship to God. I'm going to try to tell you about it. Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
Like, what's Donna's answer? Like, oh yeah, I'm in a relationship to God. Now I'm going to tell you about it. And like how the question was heard to some, like, let me stand at a distance. Let me reflect on it. Like some like, well, by faith I can get to here, or revelation I can get to here. She's like, oh God, well, God's my companion. And, there's a certain kind of like, I don't know. Something about that being different, but we'll figure it out later, because I have a whole nother group of these people that we can make commentary on next time, assuming this is not a horrible idea. All right. So, Nathan, thank you for sitting here while we did this.
Hey, thanks for letting me join in. This is fun.
Well, how do you like this? Really sweet.
I'm feeling it.
Go to homebrewedchristianity.com. You can find all sorts of junk there.
All kinds of junk.
Yeah. Talk to us on Twitter. What's your Twitter, Nathan?
Nathan Loves Tree. It's supposed to be trees, but I ran out of characters, so it's just tree.
He loves one tree, but he won't tell you which one.
It's a secret.
He doesn't want you to cut it down. Mine's Absher Fuller. If you want to read some books with us on Epic Reads, you can join the Homebrewed community, which I'm pretty sure is homebrewedcommunity.com. And I can't keep deep voice because I'm distracted by the single tree you love. Did you name your tree?
Yeah, it's also a secret.
Uh-oh. Jug just, they just added some sweet. You hear that?
Oh. This is the breakdown here. Drums.
It's a breakdown.
Yeah. Here it comes.
Oh, there we go. But, so February, I'm going to be in San Francisco at GTU. And I think the next day, if it all works out, I want to record a LectioCast with Daniel Kirk. And I think all the Bible passages are going to be the clobber passages.
Nice.
So to be the Clobbercast. I'm not joking. I pitched this idea to him. I'm like, Fuller Seminary did not like you because you like gay people too much for biblical reasons. And they always quote the same stupid Bible passages. So we should do a LectioCast just in the clobber passage. He's like, all right. I don't know if it's going to happen, but I think it should.
I hope it does. That'd be awesome.
Because who doesn't want a clobbercast? Non-violent clobbercast. But then it's PYM. Your Grieger. Day early. I'll be in North Carolina in April. I'm just talking to listen to this music. I want to go watch Star Wars again. The Lakers won 2 games in a row. That's depressing. We're trying to get a real player next year. We don't need no 10 wins. Got to keep under 10.
Listen, I'm from Northeast Ohio. I'm not used to sports teams winning.
I know. They got to leave there to win. Then they come back and lose. Poor LeBron. He should just come to Los Angeles. They don't like him really in Cleveland. They still haven't got over it.
No.
He's just come to Los Angeles. He'd be great Laker.
I came. I love it.
See? LeBron. At Nathan Loves Tree would tell you. About the joys of Los Angeles. If you don't want to come, Kevin Durant. At Nathan Love Tree. Let's see who else is a free agent next year. Westbrook is going to be a free agent soon too. He could come. We don't want Westbrook and Durant in Los Angeles. It's not working out in Oklahoma. Shout out Todd Littleton. All right, peace.